In the vast deserts west of Luxor, the wind doesn't just howl. It sings through the bones of broken temples. It carries whispers older than any king, murmuring stories the world has long forgotten. They say the sand remembers every secret, every sin buried beneath its shifting dunes. And tonight, it remembers one more. The story of Neb-Hetep, the forgotten pharaoh of mirrors, begins not in the distant past, but right now, under the sterile, flickering lights of a modern museum. Dr. Selim Rashed, an archaeologist in his mid-30s with a reputation for chasing lost dynasties, stood in a newly discovered chamber sealed deep beneath Deir el-Bahari. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of ancient dust and something sharp like copper. At his feet, half buried in the fine sand that had poured in over millennia, lay a sarcophagus unlike any he had ever seen. Instead of the usual hieroglyphs celebrating the deceased's life, its sides were engraved with dozens of faces. Each one was a portrait of terror, frozen in a silent, eternal scream. "Professor," whispered his young assistant, Lena, her voice trembling slightly. "The lid, it's solid gold." Her breath hitched. The discovery was monumental. But there was something unsettling about the tomb, a feeling that went beyond the usual reverence for the dead. Selim, however, was focused on the prize. With immense care, they lifted the heavy stone lid, and there, nestled in the darkness, they found the mask. It gleamed with an unnatural light under their torches, the gold seeming almost liquid, alive. The mask's expression was one of serene, unnerving awareness. Two eyes, crafted from the deepest lapis lazuli, seemed to stare not at them, but through them. Beside the mummy, a fragile burial scroll bore a small tag. The inscription was simple, chilling. The face of the undying, he who becomes all who wear him. A cryptic warning or a boast from a long-dead king. Selim just smiled, his heart pounding with triumph. To him, this was the find of a lifetime, the discovery that would etch his name into history. But to the silent, watchful desert, it was merely the beginning of another cycle, a story doomed to repeat itself. Days later, the Mask of Neb-Hetep was the centerpiece of Selim's private restoration lab in Cairo. It sat on a velvet pedestal, an artifact of immense value and historical significance. Lina, ever cautious, warned him about moving it without the proper ritual permissions from the Antiquities Council. "These things have protocols for a reason, Selim," she urged. "There are stories, traditions, double quotes," but he just waved a dismissive hand. "We're scientists, Lena, not storytellers. Our job is to analyze, not appease ancient spirits." His words were confident, but the moment the heavy glass case closed around the mask, the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. A cold spot seemed to radiate from the golden face, a palpable chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. That night, Selim sat in his office, meticulously reviewing the security footage from the lab. He was cataloging every angle of the mask for his research paper. As he scrubbed through the timeline, his breath caught in his throat. He paused the video, squinting at the screen. In one frame, the mask's lapis eyes were looking straight ahead as designed. But in the very next frame, captured a fraction of a second later, they were angled slightly, looking directly into the camera lens, directly at him. He replayed the clip again and again. It wasn't a trick of the light. Every time the eyes shifted, a subtle, impossible movement. They seemed to be focusing, closing the distance between the ancient gaze and his own reflection in the dark monitor. A profound sense of unease began to creep into his scientific mind, a cold dread that logic couldn't explain away. He tried to rationalize it, a glitch in the camera, a distortion in the glass. But the feeling lingered, the image of those shifting eyes burned into his memory. Later that night, Selim woke up, not with a slow, groggy awareness, but with a sudden, violent jolt. A cold sweat slicked his skin. He wasn't in his bed. He was standing, not in his apartment, but in a vast, cavernous throne room made of shifting shadows and obsidian stone. Torches burned with an eerie blue flame, casting long, dancing silhouettes. Rows of robed priests, their faces hidden in darkness, bowed low before him, their forms shimmering like a heat haze. A voice, ancient and resonant, echoed through the chamber, seeming to come from the very stones around him. "Wear me," it commanded, a whisper that felt like a thunderclap inside his skull, "and be remembered for all eternity." He looked down at his hands, expecting to see his own flesh, but instead saw them wrapped in ancient linen bandages, the hands of a mummy. He recoiled in horror, stumbling backward. His eyes caught his reflection in the polished obsidian floor, and a scream died in his throat. The face staring back at him was not his own. It was the serene, golden face of the mask. With a desperate, primal effort, he tore himself awake, gasping for air, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was back in his bedroom, the familiar sight a shocking relief. But his relief turned to ice-cold terror. There, sitting on his desk, mere feet from his bed, was the Mask of Neb-Hetep. It gleamed softly in the moonlight, its lapis eyes fixed on him. He knew with a certainty that defied all reason that he had locked it securely in the glass case in his lab across the city. It was impossible, but there it was, and he had the chilling realization that the mask hadn't just moved. It had followed him. In the days that followed the discovery of the Mask of Neb-Hetep, something began to shift in Dr. Selim Rashed. It started small. His colleagues in the Cairo Museum's lab would stop their conversations when he entered, later whispering about the change in his voice. It had dropped an octave, resonating with a strange, deep authority they'd never heard before. His handwriting, once a rushed academic scroll, now flowed onto the page in elegant, curling strokes that looked eerily like ancient hieratic script. He spent hours alone in the lab, just staring at the golden mask, his reflection warped in its polished surface. His partner, Dr. Lena Halim, grew worried. The man she knew, the passionate, sometimes clumsy academic, was disappearing. He was becoming colder, more distant. One afternoon, she found him standing before the mask's climate-controlled case, his posture ramrod straight like a statue. "Selim, what's wrong?" she asked gently. "You haven't been yourself." He turned, his gaze passing right through her. "Lena," he said, his voice slow and heavy, "you were not born to speak to your king." A nervous laugh escaped her lips. A joke, it had to be a joke. But then she looked into his eyes. For a split second, they weren't the familiar warm brown she loved. They shimmered faintly with the cold, metallic glint of gold. The joke died in her throat. That night, the museum's security cameras captured something deeply unsettling. The footage, grainy and silent, showed Selim walking into the darkened lab after hours. He moved with a purpose that was both foreign and chilling. He bypassed security codes with practiced ease and opened the reinforced glass case. The mask, which had sat inert for 3 millennia, seemed to stir in his hands. It turned slightly, as if a magnet aligning to its true north, a living thing, recognizing its host. He didn't hesitate. He pressed the golden artifact to his face. There was no sound on the recording, but his body's reaction was clear. He convulsed, his back arching in a silent scream as the solid gold of the mask softened, shimmering like liquid mercury. It flowed, it sank, it merged into his skin, becoming one with his flesh and bone. When he finally raised his head to the camera, his features were the same, yet entirely different. The man named Selim Rashed was gone. In his place stood a king from a forgotten age, wearing a human face as his own temporary mask. A few weeks later, a new exhibition opened at the museum, announced with grand ceremony, The Lost Pharaoh of Mirrors. It became an instant sensation. Visitors were captivated, not just by the artifacts, but by the exhibition's peculiar curator. He would guide them through the halls, his voice mesmerizing, his movements filled with an ancient, regal grace that held everyone spellbound. His museum name tag still read Dr. Selim Rashed, but anyone who had known the real Selim could see the truth. This was not him. This was something else, something far, far older. Lena couldn't stay away. She had to understand. She returned to the museum one evening, long after the last visitor had departed. She found him in the center of the exhibition hall, kneeling before the now empty case that had once held the mask. His head was bowed, and from his lips spilled a torrent of guttural sounds, a language that echoed with the dust of collapsed dynasties. It was a tongue no one had spoken for 3,000 years. He chanted, his voice rising in power, Neb-Hetep rises, and through me he shall see again. As the final word left his lips, the lights in the entire museum flickered violently, and then a sound like cracking ice filled the air. Every mirror, every pane of glass, every reflective surface in the building fractured simultaneously, splintering outward from the central point. It was as if something trapped beneath the surface for millennia had finally opened its eyes. Days later, Cairo police were called to investigate. They found the museum utterly deserted. Not a soul was inside. But the scene was bizarre. Every statue, every bust, every single display piece had been turned. They no longer faced their designated positions. Instead, they were all oriented toward the main entrance, as if forming a silent, expectant honor guard. Lena knew this wasn't a police matter. She followed a hunch, a trail of breadcrumbs only she could see, leading her south, back to where it all began, Luxor. She ventured deep inside the very tomb where they had first unearthed the mask. And there, in the suffocating stillness, she saw them. Fresh footprints in the ancient dust, leading directly to the sarcophagus of Neb-Hetep. The massive stone lid was pushed aside. It was open, and it was empty. Lying beside it, folded neatly on the ground, was Selim's jacket. The mask was gone. The pharaoh had returned home. That night, a full moon hung like a silver coin in the desert sky. From a high ridge, Lena watched the valley below. Torches. First one, then 10, then hundreds of them, moving like a river of fire across the dunes. She could just make out the shapes of figures in the flickering light, robed in linen, walking in a silent, solemn procession toward the distant horizon. At their head marched a figure that was and was not Selim. The mask of Neb-Hetep was fused to his face, no longer just an object, but a part of him, its golden surface glowing like the molten heart of the sun. He turned his head once, a slow, deliberate movement, as if he knew she was watching. For a single terrifying heartbeat, the polished gold of the mask caught the moonlight, and Lena saw her own face reflected back at her, and her reflection smiled. Then a sudden gust of wind rose from the desert, a sandstorm that swallowed the figures whole, erasing them from sight. Lena returned to the tomb one last time before she left. On the wall near the entrance was a new carving, the edges still sharp. The hieroglyphs were perfect, etched with a master's hand. She didn't need to be an Egyptologist to understand the warning they held for all time. The face of kings is eternal, it read. You only borrow it. Some say the spirit of Neb-Hetep, wearing Selim's form, still walks the earth, his phantom army trailing behind him. Others believe the mask was shed and now drifts with the desert storms, a golden trap waiting for another soul proud enough, arrogant enough to believe they can claim eternity for themselves. But eternity has rules, and here, in the ancient silence of Egypt, you must remember that every treasure is a test, and every discovery is a price to be paid. Thank you so much for joining me on this chilling journey into the sands of time. If you enjoy tales of ancient mysteries and curses, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one. Stay curious.